Hi everyone, Pam Gregory, astrologer. I'm going to be speaking to you today on something that's obviously very much dominating our news at the moment, which is the coronavirus COVID-19. And in this, I'm in no way attempting to minimise people who get this and have extremely serious symptoms. So please understand that's the context. With some people, the symptoms are mild. Other people, they don't even know they have it. But with some, it becomes an extremely serious disease. But I just wanted to kind of talk about things that I haven't maybe talked about astrologically before, some perspective on this. And many people are asking astrologers at the moment, how long will this last, this virus? And I may say that when we have the conjunction between Jupiter and Pluto on the 4th of April, that could certainly represent a peak in the number of cases with the virus. Or I might talk about the nodal axis moving into Gemini and Sagittarius in May, and Gemini rules the lungs. I might refer to that, or I might say there's a possibility that in the autumn, when Mars in its own sign moves retrograde between mid-September and mid-November, it's possible there could be a resurgence of the virus. So all of those would be reasonable astrological arguments. But what I think the question really shows is a mindset that the future is fixed. The future is fixed as if it's already planned. It's a film set that's been built, and we just step onto the film set. And with our understanding of quantum theory, that isn't how it is, because all we have for the future are waves of potential. And equally, astrology is a language of mathematical probability to help us with that. But essentially, the future is not yet fixed. It's not yet formed even. They're just waves of potential. And we are co-creating with those waves of potential in every moment. And that's why I've talked so extensively in both of my books about birth charts are very much showing that our unique pattern is fixed at birth. That doesn't change. It's fixed for this particular lifetime on this earth. But the level at which we live it can be very different. So that's where our latitude comes in our level of consciousness. So before I get into this, just again as context, I'd like to read out a quote which I think is so relevant to where we are and what I'd like to talk about today. And this quote comes from a lovely American lady called Peggy Black. She channels, and has done for some years, she channels some beings called the Team. And what she has said recently, or what they have said through her, is when star humans become conscious, other realities and dimensions appear. Your astronomers continue to discover new planets beyond your known solar system. This is an example that humanity has raised its consciousness enough to allow these planets to be visible. And most astrologers believe that, by the way. Most astrologers, as we discover new planets through our history, we recognize that those archetypes become part of our consciousness as human beings. So let me talk first of all about an asteroid I haven't mentioned before. This asteroid is called Hygeia, from which we get the word hygiene, because she was linked to the Greek goddess of health. And she's very much about health, her archetype, and also cleanliness. And when we have a lack of cleanliness, how that can result in disease and toxins and illness. So I think very relevant for where we are now. And think of the Chinese wildlife markets while I'm talking about that. Now, some people feel that the wildlife markets were very much part of this virus mutating. Others have discounted that, and they think there are two other main causes or triggers for this virus. I'm well aware of those other ideas behind it, so please, you don't need to write to me about those. I'm very well aware of those. But let's just stick with this symbolism of Hygeia. She has a 5.5-year orbit, and late last year, at the end of December, when we had the solar eclipse at 4 degrees of Capricorn on the 26th of December, Hygeia, and by the way, the very first cases of COVID-19 were appearing in Wuhan, in China. Hygeia was exactly conjunct a dwarf planet, which I haven't talked about before either, called Sedna. And Sedna has an 11,500 year, that's correct, orbit. And Sedna was also at its closest point to the Earth, at perigee at that point. They were both exactly conjunct at 27 degrees of Taurus. Now, Taurus, the sign, is linked to the Earth and the human body. It's fixed Earth, it's the human body. Sedna, in its symbolism, is linked to major Earth changes and also the awakening of humanity. Now, there's much to be said about Sedna, some wonderful myths about her, but essentially she is beyond 3D consciousness. She exists beyond that. She exists deep in the oceans, deep in the earth. She's very linked to all forms of life. Everything, every living thing has consciousness for Sedna, kind of a pantheism, and it's very shamanic as well. And she was so connected to the animal kingdom that in one of the myths she actually married a dog, and some people say that could have been a good option, but she married a dog and they actually had hybrid offspring. So she has this deep, deep connection to the Earth's rhythms, all of life and all of animal life. And we can meditate upon her and her symbolism, and by connecting to that archetype, we can start to raise our consciousness. Well, we have to raise our consciousness indeed to reach her archetype, to reach her energy, because she exists beyond normal 3D consciousness. So let me now talk about another dwarf planet that I did write about in my last book, called Haumea. Haumea, in myth, she's linked to the Hawaiian goddess of fertility, very linked again to raising our consciousness and the regeneration of the earth. Now, Haumea, both at the end of December and even now, is at 27 degrees of Libra. So in exact aspect to Hygeia and Sedna, and it's when any planetary body comes into exact geometry or tight geometry with another that again its symbolism starts to come into prominence. And indeed these asteroids and dwarf planets were discovered a few years ago, but very few astrologers, a handful of astrologers, are talking about them. And, I haven't talked about Hygeia or Sedna before either, but gradually they permeate our consciousness. And, just like we did with Chiron, just like we did with Eris more recently, astrologers start to talk about their archetypes as they become very relevant to our reality. So we have this exact aspect between Haumea, 27 of Libra, and Hygeia and Sedna at 27 degrees of Taurus. Now, just to remind you, if you haven't read my book, Haumea has some wonderful gifts. She's very linked, as I say, to this regeneration of the earth. And after in the myths about her, after there was famine on the land or mismanagement of nature by poor agricultural practices, she was able to always produce wild food or seafood even. She had a magic stick called the Makalai, and she could just use this magic stick to produce new fresh food and fresh life. So she's constantly linked to this rebirth, particularly connected with the earth, but also very much about raising our awareness. Now, as I say, 27 degrees of Libra for Haumea, and Chariklo, that I've talked about recently, who's in myth the wife of Chiron, is exactly at 27 of Capricorn. So we have an exact square between Haumea and Chariklo. And Chariklo, as I discussed, and go back to earlier videos over the last couple of months that I've done about this, but she is an exquisite energy. She's very connected to enabling healing simply by her state of being. She's about the infinite ground of being. in very Buddhist terms. She has this permanent stillness where you're just able to drop into the ever-present now with her symbolism. She's very linked also to being a kind of soul midwife almost at transitions of life to death. But also, and again, I have to thank Melanie Reinhardt, who's a real expert on Chariklo and has done a lot of research on her, that Chariklo is always also very present where we have big transitions in consciousness as well. So they are exactly square, and they are both, Haumea and Chariklo are both square to Eris in Aries. Now, so it's forming a T-square. So Eris is the planet of discord, the goddess of discord, the goddess of chaos, but not without purpose, to break down the old, because Eris, the whole of 2020, is square to Pluto in Capricorn. That's representative of the old paradigm, the old top-down order. So Eris, as we've seen in Hong Kong over past months, very often will take to the streets and rebel and riot, but with a purpose to move us to a higher state of being, to move us to a higher reality. So this T-square has been and continues to be strong as well at the moment. So these planetary bodies are very much consistent in speaking of an evolutionary jump in consciousness, an awakening of humanity, that kind of thing. And they are all starting to emerge into our consciousness at this time. Now, this whole theory is supported very much by cosmology. Again, I've mentioned in videos before that if we look in cosmological terms, our whole solar system is spinning out of an area known as the magnetic cloud in space that's been very protective for our Earth. But now we're spinning out into an area of space where we don't have that, and the Earth is receiving much, much more cosmic and galactic energies that may be partly or even fully responsible for some of the big jumps in consciousness that many people are experiencing right now. And let's just think what's been happening in our world over certainly the last few years, maybe even the last couple of decades. That, for instance, we have had huge pollution, plastic pollution, let's say, on our Earth. Everyone has seen videos and documentaries about that, but did it really radically change our behaviour globally? Not really. We've seen apocalyptic fires in Australia. Now, I know that's partly linked to the mismanagement of water there, I'm aware of that, but again, absolute apocalypse was witnessed in Australia. Did that change global habits very much? Not really. We've seen incredible flooding over the last few years in many countries, in India, Bangladesh particularly, China, some states in the US, very much in the UK as well. Did that change behaviour? Not really. So unless humanity was willing to make a radical shift in behaviour, it seems that the universe will do it for us. If we're not going to do it ourselves, the universe will do it for us. And so the virus has come in and been really savage now across the world. But within less than a month, and you'll all be aware of this, I'm sure, because many people are talking about it online, within less than a month, partly because our air travel is grounded. Aquarius's air travel, Saturn has just moved in there, constriction, limitations, so very few planes flying right now. We now have clear skies, completely clear skies appearing over China. We have flowers appearing, blossoming out of the burnt land in Australia. We even have swans and dolphins appearing in the canals in Venice. So how fast the earth can regenerate. It's beautiful to see. And in my garden here, I've heard more birds and bees than I've heard in a very long time. So this is the archetype of Haumea, this regeneration of the earth that seems to be able to bounce back if we step back from a lot of parts of our modern civilization. So one of the ways I'm seeing COVID-19, and I know others have referred to it in this way, is a kind of purification, a clearing of the old order. I feel in some way it's linked to that, linked to this jump in consciousness. And even these symptoms themselves of COVID-19, there seems to be some kind of energetic mirror going on here, because one of the key symptoms, as we know, is a fever, or the fever's reflective of the fires in Australia. Breathing difficulties. For many years in China and India particularly, residents had to wear face masks because the air pollution was so bad. And now we're wearing face masks as protection against the virus. In addition, our containment, lockdowns in many, many countries, that sense of containment, is that a reflection of how we've treated our zoo, factory farming animals, and also the wildlife animals in the Chinese markets? Because if we abuse nature and animals, it will have its consequences. Saturn, reality check consequences. So it seems to me that even the symptoms of COVID-19 are in somehow reflecting how we've behaved with the earth. And it's very interesting, these archetypes I've described are really about a kind of divine consciousness, particularly Sedna, particularly Haumea, particularly Chariklo, are kind of divine consciousness, this universal force that flows through everything. And how aware are we of that in our daily modern life, particularly in cities? We've become very disconnected, perhaps. And as I say, even in virtual lockdown in my garden, I'm so aware of nature just absolutely blossoming at the moment. So I really do feel this is a period of quantum jumps in consciousness. And I think we are much more powerful than we realise. And I'd really like you to refer you to the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton with this. This is absolutely at the heart of his work. Read Biology of Belief if you haven't read it. Also refer you to the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I've attended many of his workshops over the years and all over the world, and witnessed and experienced how meditators, I've actually experienced this myself, but meditators over a period of days, not weeks, but days, can significantly, and even in some cases dramatically, increase their immunity. And it's measured. It's measured by brainwave patterns and blood tests and all that kind of thing. So this is not woo-woo. This is measured. It's measurable. Lynn McTaggart, who I often refer to as oh, by the way, a good book to read on this with Joe Dispenza is his latest book, Becoming Supernatural, that will tell you more about that, and obviously his website. Lynn McTaggart, who I call the Queen of Intention, over many years she has set intentions to focus on a particular issue. I mean, some years ago she did this to lower violence in the Middle East in a particular area over a particular time period. And again, it was measured. The violence before and the violence at the end of the meditation was measured. It was all done via meditation, as is Joe Dispenza's work. So again, it's not woo-woo, it's measurable. It has a tangible result. And a great book to read on this with Lynn's work is The Intention Experiment. So what all of this is saying is that our minds and our emotions are much more powerful than we can ever imagine, particularly when we're kind of in a lockdown in 3D reality. We can feel very victim-like and very small, but if we go into that fear, apart from fear, again, measurably depleting our immune system, it makes our energy chaotic. It makes our energy chaotic. And that feeds into the collective as well. So it isn't helping us and it isn't helping the collective. So if we can just tweak the compass needle by even a few degrees to start to see this virus in a different way, as symptomatic of the collapse of the old and symptomatic perhaps of the jump towards the new that's coming in for us in this massive year of transformation, perhaps that will help. And what I'd really recommend to you is that you develop an intention statement. I'm going to suggest one to you right now. Develop an intention statement that is in the present tense. They always have to be stated in the present tense, because otherwise you'll keep kind of chasing them away into the future. And one that I've developed that may be helpful for you is, and let me just read it to you now. COVID-19 is already benign, and we are easily harmonizing with it. COVID-19 is already benign, and we are easily harmonizing with it. So just consider that as something you might really set as a clear intention and then release to the universe. Because with all viruses, ultimately, and it's interesting, our UK Chief Medical Officer has been talking about this because we have many viruses within our body already, but we've been able to physically mutate to live in harmony with them, to live with them. And our Chief Medical Officer has been talking about what he calls herd immunity, where a large number of people are contracting this virus but developing antibodies to it when they get through the illness and survive. So there is a physical mutation that takes place, as evidenced by the antibodies. But as I keep saying, I think there's also a consciousness mutation that is happening here, which is so important for us. And I also feel Saturn is currently in Aquarius, the most futuristic sign, the sign to do with the alien, the outsider, the maverick, the different person. It's very connected to alien beings. And I think there's going to be much more disclosure this year as more planets, well, Saturn is in Aquarius now till the 2nd of July. It moves fully into Aquarius with Jupiter in December. And then Pluto in a few years also moves into Aquarius. So I think we're going to see more and more evidence of life beyond this earth, but already there are benevolent beings helping us on earth. I have many people I know, many friends who channel such beings, and very much about this shift in consciousness, this upward shift in consciousness. So yes, it's very easy to feel contracted in these periods. And frankly, if I watch the news, I can kind of feel my vibration going down. But our task really here for ourselves and for the collective is to try and keep our vibration at a higher level. Because if we can do that, is it possible that we can start to access different dimensions which up till now have been unimaginable for us to experience? And they're not in a different place, they're at a different frequency. So yes, as many people have been saying on the internet, it's a fantastic time to go inwards, to retreat, to meditate, pretend you're on a Buddhist retreat. Excellent. It's a great way to increase our vibration through meditation, breath work, etc. But perhaps we also need to look upwards. I mentioned in my last video that I think we're at a Columbus moment. Columbus felt that his world was a certain size and dimension, and all of a sudden he had this vision of a much bigger world. And I think that's where we are at right now. I think we're absolutely on the verge of something, probably the biggest spiritual adventure of our lives, of a vast cosmic existence where we can start to think of ourselves much more as galactic citizens, or as the quote suggested at the beginning, star humans. And really that will take us on a very different journey. But we have to be able to cope with our fear and anxiety to get a higher level of frequency, to be able to access those dimensions and access the archetypes of Sedna and that accelerated awakening of humanity that I think this is all about. So just finally, I've talked in other videos about the fork in the road, and I really feel that that's where we're at, and I feel that the fork is getting more divergent. One path is clearly, incoherence and fear and anxiety. And yes, we're human, and it's very understandable that we feel that way because we're in unprecedented circumstances, which can feel very lonely and very isolating. But on the other hand, can we have the courage, particularly as the new moon in Eris is happening right around now, can we have the courage to step out onto a path which is as yet unknown, as yet unlived, but we trust that that higher frequency will take us to a better place. So I hope that's helped. I've delivered it with much humility in the circumstances, but I just hope that these new archetypes that I haven't talked about before will be helpful in supporting all of our journeys that we're going through right now. Okay, God bless, and I hope it's been helpful for you. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.